My name is Lena Hart. I'm 20 years old now. But this story didn't begin when I was grown enough to understand abandonment. It began when I was 10. My mom dropped me off at my grandma's house with a small suitcase and a tired smile. She said she had to take care of something and would be back in a week. Just a week, she promised, crouching down to zip my bag. Be good for Grandma. I believed her. Because when you're 10, you don't yet know how to question your own mother. I watched her car disappear down the street from my grandma's front porch. I remember counting the steps from the door to the mailbox, thinking she'd be back before I finished counting again. That was the last time I saw her for 10 years. The first few days didn't feel strange. Grandma cooked my favorite meals. She let me sleep in her bed when I had nightmares. She said Mom was busy, but she'd call soon. A week passed, then 2. I asked every night, "Is Mom coming tomorrow?" Grandma always said the same thing. Soon. Her voice never sounded confident. By the 3rd week, I stopped unpacking my suitcase. I kept it under the bed, ready, because leaving things inside felt safer than accepting I might be staying. No one explained anything to me. No fight, no goodbye, no reason. Just absence. School started again. I wore the same clothes I'd arrived in, rotated through Grandma's careful laundry schedule. Teachers asked why my mom wasn't at meetings anymore. I didn't know what to say. "She's busy," I told them. Busy became the word that covered everything. When kids talked about their parents picking them up, I waited for Grandma. When forms asked for a parent's signature, Grandma signed. At night, I listened for the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. It never came. One evening, months later, I heard Grandma crying quietly in the kitchen. I didn't interrupt her. I had already learned something important. Adults didn't cry because they were confused. They cried because they knew the answer and wished it were different. Eventually, I understood the truth without anyone saying it out loud. My mom hadn't been delayed. She hadn't been stuck. She hadn't been planning to come back. She had left, and I was the thing she left behind. Still, for years, I imagined her return like it was a scene waiting to be finished. I pictured apologies, explanations, a version of her that still knew my favorite color. I didn't know then that while I was growing up without her, she was out there building a life where I only existed as a memory, a carefully cropped one. And that 10 years later, when I finally found her again, she wouldn't recognize the person I had become after the first few months. People stopped asking when my mom was coming back. That was how I knew the waiting phase was over. At 10, I still believed absence was temporary. At 11, I started to understand that some goodbyes happen without words. By 12, I had learned not to expect explanations from people who never planned to give them. My grandma never said my mom's name unless I asked. She didn't speak badly about her. She didn't defend her either. She just adjusted our life quietly, as if making room for a reality she never wanted. She moved my suitcase out from under the bed and folded my clothes into the dresser. That was the day it became official. Money was tight. My grandma lived on a small pension, and suddenly there was a child to raise. She took on extra sewing work. I learned early how to stretch food, how to say no when school trips cost too much, how to pretend I didn't mind. I minded, but I never said it out loud. Every form I filled out asked for Mother's name. Sometimes I wrote it, sometimes I left it blank. Neither felt right. When other kids complained about their parents, I stayed quiet. I didn't have anything to complain about, only a silence that followed me everywhere. The hardest moments were the small ones. Parent-teacher meetings where my grandma sat alone in a chair too small for her aging knees. School performances where I scanned the audience, knowing exactly who wouldn't be there. On Mother's Day, I learned to fake a smile. I made cards for my grandma instead. She deserved them more. Still, there was a part of me that wondered, had my mom missed me at all? Did she ever think about my birthday, my first period, the way I cut my hair short because I thought she might like it? No calls came, no letters, no money. Eventually, Even hope learned how to disappear quietly. By the time I was 16, I stopped telling people I lived with my grandma for now. I just said, my grandma raised me. It sounded stronger. It sounded final. And somehow, it was easier than explaining a mother-shaped absence that never healed. At night, I sometimes imagined running into her somewhere, at a grocery store, on the street, anywhere that forced her to see me. In those fantasies, she always recognized me instantly. She always said my name. Reality would prove how wrong I was. When I turned 18, my grandma sat me down at the kitchen table. "There are things you should know," she said. She told me my mom had called once, years ago, asked if I was doing okay, said she was not ready, not ready to come back, not ready to explain, not ready to be a mother. She asked me not to tell you. My grandma added, I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I had grown past anger, past expectation. I was tired in a way children shouldn't be. By 20, I had stopped looking for her entirely. I built my life around what I had, not what I was missing. I thought that chapter was closed. I didn't know that she was still telling a story about me, one where I was frozen in time, small, smiling, convenient. And that one careless scroll online would pull me straight back into a past she had rewritten, using my face. Silence doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in layers. At first, it's loud. Questions with no answers. Days that stretch too long. Nights filled with imagined explanations. Then, slowly, it becomes background noise. Something you live with. Something you stop noticing because noticing hurts too much. By the time I was 17, my mother existed only in fragments. A name on old school forms. A face in a handful of childhood photos. A story I learned to tell without emotion. I stopped checking the mailbox for letters that would never come. I stopped flinching when unknown numbers called my phone. I stopped imagining apologies. That was my version of moving on. My grandma never pressured me to forgive. She never asked me to forget either. She just loved me in the way people do when they're trying to fill a space that was never supposed to be empty. When she got sick during my final year of high school, the roles reversed. I became the responsible one. I learned how to manage appointments, medications, paperwork, the same skills she'd quietly taught me growing up. We were a small, solid unit, and for the first time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt chosen. When I left for college, I took very little with me. A few clothes, a laptop, a box of photos my grandma insisted I keep. Just in case, she said. I didn't open that box for years. During my second year, someone from class mentioned finding a relative through social media. You'd be surprised what people share, she said, laughing. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later that night, curiosity crept in. Not hope, not longing, just a quiet question. Was she still alive? I typed my mother's name into the search bar. I wasn't prepared for how quickly she appeared. There she was, smiling, confident, surrounded by comments, and calling herself a mother. Her profile picture stopped my breath. It was me, or rather, me at 8 years old. A photo I remembered clearly, taken at a park, just months before she left. The caption read, "My whole world." My hands shook as I scrolled. Post after post, she painted a picture of warmth and devotion. Throwback photos of me, captions about sacrifices, stories about raising a strong daughter. People adored her. "You're such an amazing mom. Your daughter is lucky to have you." This made me cry. I felt sick, not because she had left, but because she had rewritten it. I didn't exist in her present. I hadn't for 10 years. But my image was still useful. She had frozen me in childhood, before I could contradict her story, before I could grow into someone who might ask questions. I scrolled deeper. No recent photos, no updates, no mention of where I was now. Just a perfectly preserved lie. I closed the app and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The anger didn't come right away. What came first was grief, not for the mother I lost, but for the version of myself she had stolen and displayed like proof of a life she never lived. That night, I opened the box of photos my grandma had given me. I compared them. They matched. Every picture she used had been taken before she disappeared. She had never seen me after that, which meant something simple and devastating. She didn't know my face anymore, and yet, she was showing it to the world as if it still belonged to her. After that night, I couldn't unsee it. Every time I opened my phone, the image of her profile hovered in my mind, my childhood face smiling back at me from a life I had never lived. I told myself to stop looking. I didn't. Curiosity turned into something sharper. Not hope, not longing. Verification. I went back to her profile the next day, then the next. I read captions more carefully. I checked dates. I noticed patterns I hadn't seen before. She posted about motherhood on holidays, on birthdays, on days when public sympathy came easily. But never once did she mention my age now. Never a graduation. Never a milestone that required her to acknowledge time had passed. In her version of reality, I never grew up. I stayed small, grateful, silent. I clicked through comments from strangers who praised her strength, her sacrifice, her devotion. "You're such an inspiration. Single moms don't get enough credit. Your daughter is so lucky." Each comment felt like a hand pressed against my chest. Because I wasn't lucky, I was abandoned, and she was being rewarded for it. What disturbed me most wasn't the lying, it was the confidence. She spoke about me as if she knew me, as if she had been there, as if 10 years of absence could be erased by carefully chosen photos and soft words. I wondered how many people had cried over her posts, believing they were witnessing honesty. I wondered if she ever thought about me while typing them, or if I had become nothing more than a prop she reused when engagement was low. For days, I didn't tell anyone what I had found. Not my grandma, not my closest friend. Saying it out loud would make it real, and part of me wasn't ready to accept that my mother hadn't just left, but had replaced me with a story where she was the hero. Eventually, I showed my grandma. She adjusted her glasses and stared at the screen for a long time. "That's you," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "but not anymore." My grandma's mouth tightened. "She never asked for those photos." "I know." We sat in silence, the weight of it settling between us. "She doesn't know who you are now," my grandma said finally. That was when it hit me. Of course she didn't. She hadn't seen me grow. She hadn't heard my voice change. She hadn't learned my habits, my opinions, my boundaries. To her, I was a memory she could control. That realization didn't break me. It steadied me. Because if she didn't know me, then whatever happened next wouldn't be about reconnection. It would be about truth. That night, I typed a message and deleted it, then typed another, then erased that too. What do you say to someone who calls herself your mother but doesn't know your face? In the end, I kept it simple. "Hi, this is Lena. Do you remember me?" I stared at the screen for a long time before hitting send. The message showed as delivered. No reply came that night, or the next morning, or the next day. Just when I was ready to accept that silence again, my phone buzzed. "Of course I remember you," she wrote. How could I forget my own daughter? I felt a strange calm wash over me, because that answer told me everything. If she truly remembered me, she wouldn't need to convince me. She would ask questions. She would want to know who I had become. Instead, she assumed the version of me she needed was still enough. A few messages later, she suggested we meet. Casual, friendly, like we were old friends catching up. I agreed. Not because I expected closure, but because I needed to see something for myself. I needed to know if, after 10 years, she could look at me, really look at me, and recognize the child she left behind. And if she couldn't, then I would finally stop wondering. The days leading up to our meeting felt unreal, like I was preparing to meet a character from a story I no longer believed in. We agreed to meet at a small cafe halfway between our cities. Neutral ground. Public. Safe. She suggested it with a smiley face, like this was a reunion she'd been casually postponing, not a decade of disappearance. I didn't tell her anything about myself. Not my age. Not where I lived. Not what I looked like now. I wanted to see what she would bring to the table on her own. The night before, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I looked for traces of the child she remembered. The round cheeks. The bangs she used to cut too short. The face she had posted online like proof of love. I didn't see her. I saw a woman she had never met. My grandma watched me button my coat before I left. "You don't owe her anything," she said gently. "I know," I replied, and I meant it. But I also knew this meeting wasn't about her. It was about me closing a door properly. At the cafe, I arrived early and chose a table near the window. My hands were steady. My heart was not. When the door opened, I recognized her immediately. Not because she looked the same, but because she looked exactly like her photos. Carefully curated, confident, put together in a way that suggested she'd had plenty of time to focus on herself. She scanned the room, searching. Her eyes passed over me. Once, twice. Then she walked past my table. I felt something in my chest loosen, not in relief, but in confirmation. She didn't know. A few seconds later, she turned back, confused, checking her phone. I stood up. "Hi," I said. "I'm Lena." She smiled politely. "Hi, I'm—" She stopped. Her eyes searched my face, clearly trying to place me somewhere familiar. "Oh," she said slowly. "I thought you'd be younger." I nodded. "It's been 10 years. Her smile froze. We sat down, and she immediately started talking about traffic, about the cafe, about how crazy life had been. She filled the space with noise the way people do when they're trying not to think. I listened. She didn't ask how old I was. She didn't ask where I'd grown up. She didn't ask who had raised me. Instead, she talked about herself, her job, her struggles, how hard it had been to do everything alone. At one point, she laughed. "You wouldn't believe how many people tell me I'm a great mom." I watched her carefully. "You post my photos a lot," I said. She waved it off. "People love them. You were such a cute kid." "Were, not are." "Do you know what I look like now?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "Well," she said. "I mean, I assumed you'd still look like you." I waited. She leaned closer, squinting slightly, like recognition might appear if she tried hard enough. It didn't. There it was, the truth, sitting between us. She had memorized my childhood face, but never bothered to update it. I took a breath. "Do you recognize me?" I asked. She laughed nervously. "Of course. You're my daughter." "That wasn't the question," I replied. The cafe noise faded into the background. She looked at me again, this time more carefully, longer. And then her expression shifted, not into recognition, but discomfort. "I mean," she said slowly, "you've changed." "Yes," I said. "That's what growing up does." Silence stretched. For the first time since she'd arrived, she had nothing ready to say. I realized then that she hadn't come to reconnect. She had come to confirm that the story she told online was still intact, that I was still small, still grateful, still easy to claim. She hadn't prepared for a stranger who shared her face. And in that moment, I understood something that hurt, but also healed. She didn't abandon me. She abandoned the responsibility of knowing me. And now, sitting across from her, I finally saw her clearly. Not as my mother, but as someone who had used motherhood as a costume and forgotten the child inside it was real. There's a moment when hope finally gives up. Not dramatically, not loudly. It just steps aside. That moment came when she tilted her head and asked, "So what do you do now?" Not "How have you been?" Not "Where did you grow up?" Just a polite question you'd ask a stranger. I answered simply, "I'm in school. I work part-time. I live with my grandmother." She nodded, distracted. That's nice. She always was very involved. Always. Like my grandma had just appeared one day to help. Not like she had stepped in because my mother disappeared. You left me there, I said quietly. Her smile faltered. I had to. I wasn't ready. I was 10, I replied. She shifted in her chair. I knew you'd be okay. You were strong even back then. There it was. The justification. I waited for her to say my name the way she used to mention something only a mother would know, to prove, just once, that I still existed to her as a person, not an idea. She didn't. Instead, she pulled out her phone. I wanted to show you something, she said brightly. She opened her social media profile and turned the screen toward me. A photo of me at 8 years old filled the display. People love this one, she said. It gets so much engagement. I stared at it. That's me, I said. I know. She smiled. You were adorable. You know I don't look like that anymore, I said. She laughed awkwardly. Well, people connect to memories. Do you? I asked. She looked confused. What do you mean? Do you connect to me? I said slowly. Or just to who I used to be? The question landed harder than I expected. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, she looked unsure. I mean, of course I care, she said. I tell people about you all the time. What do you tell them? I asked. That I raised you to be strong. I felt something inside me break cleanly in two. You didn't raise me, I said. Her eyes flicked away. You left, I continued. And when you came back just now, you didn't recognize me. You walked right past me. She frowned. That doesn't mean anything. It means everything, I replied. Her voice softened, almost pleading. You've changed so much. I couldn't have known. That's the point, I said. You didn't know, because you didn't try. The silence between us was thick and uncomfortable. People around us laughed, sipped coffee, lived their lives, unaware that something fundamental had just ended at a corner table. Finally, she sighed. I think you're being unfair. I smiled sadly. That was the moment I understood. She didn't feel guilt. She felt inconvenience. I didn't come here to punish you, I said, standing up. I came here to see if you still knew me. She looked up, startled. And? I looked at her one last time. You don't, I said. Her face fell, not in remorse, but in realization that the story she'd been telling, the one with the perfect mother and the frozen child, had just met reality. I walked out of the cafe without looking back. Outside, the air felt lighter, not because it didn't hurt, but because I wasn't carrying questions anymore. I had my answer. She didn't recognize me because she never looked for me, and she didn't lose me that day. She lost the right to use my face to tell her story. I didn't cry after I left the cafe. That surprised me. I walked 3 blocks before I realized my hands were cold. Then another 2 before I noticed how steady my breathing was. It felt less like heartbreak and more like something settling into place. Closure doesn't always come with comfort. Sometimes it comes with certainty. That night, I opened my laptop and looked at her profile one last time. The same photos were still there. My childhood face, my smile, my image doing work I had never agreed to do. I didn't comment. I didn't message her again. I didn't argue. I did something quieter. I reported the photos, not out of spite, but because they were mine. The platform asked for verification, proof of identity, proof of ownership. I uploaded my ID, my birth certificate, photos of myself now. It took a few days. During that time, she sent me messages. Why are you being so cold? People are asking questions. You're hurting me. I didn't respond. For 10 years, silence had been my inheritance. Now, it was my choice. A week later, the photos were gone. So were the captions. So was the version of her that had been praised for motherhood she never practiced. She blocked me shortly after. I didn't mind, because for the first time, she couldn't reach me by using who I used to be. My grandma noticed the change in me almost immediately. "You look lighter," she said one morning as we washed dishes together. "I am," I replied. She nodded like she understood. I didn't tell many people what happened. I didn't need to explain it out loud for it to be real. What mattered was this. I no longer wondered if she would come back. I no longer waited for recognition. I no longer imagined apologies. I had met her exactly as she was, and that was enough. The truth is, she didn't fail to recognize me because time changed my face. She failed because she never stayed long enough to learn it. And I stopped needing her to know me the moment I realized I knew myself. I am not a memory. I am not a photo. I am not proof of someone else's story. I am the child who was left, and the woman who chose not to disappear. And that's a story I finally get to tell on my own terms.